So I guess we could start with what inspired you to write Born on Monday?
Oh, with Born on Monday specifically?
Hmm.
So originally, when the first book I came out with was called 50 States, and inside 50 States, there's like 50 short stories, and there's one story for each state. Um, and there's a story in there called Time Capsule, which is takes place in Maine, and that actually is the first chapter of Born on Monday. So a lot of the stories I wrote in 50 states are going to end up becoming books, and there's a lot of crossover between some of these stories that are in 50 states and the books that I'm writing. And it sort of was just a natural progression. And I just felt like there were a couple things that happened. One, was Born on Monday just sort of resonated with me in terms of the characters. And initially in Time Capsule, all it really, the story, all it was really about was how sometimes when people stay home, as opposed to, let's say, going to college, the people who stay home kind of stay a little bit the same, right? They're still having an extension of their lives, where the people who go off have all these other dynamic experiences and they come back quite changed and they look at the entire town and everything differently. And that's sort of how it started. But then I had another thing that happened to me, which was a friend of mine actually had a stalker story that happened to them. And she just happened to mention some of the things that happened. And I was like, wow, I could really see how that could play a factor into the story I was already working on, which was Time Capsule, because I had carried it forward a little bit from there. And that's sort of how there was sort of like an organic approach of how it just sort of all came together.
That's really awesome. And what was your writing process like?
So this writing process normally, so when I did 50 states, right, I did one story a week for 50 weeks. And that was sort of my writing process. And when I did my debut novel, Third Wheel, I kind of followed the same format. I did one chapter a week for, I think it was like 26, 27 weeks. And that once I'm in it, that's just sort of like the emotion I had. Born on Monday was very different. So Born on Monday took months to develop, let's say, the first 10 chapters. And then the last 23 chapters were all written in a single month. Like it just all came out. And I think it sort of, and I think it kind of plays that way. I mean, since you've read the book, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it sort of feels that way in the book. Like you get all this depth in the front end. There's
Mhm.
stuff happening, right? So you're interested, but there's a lot of depth. And then all of a sudden, it's like falling off a cliff.
Mhm.
And you just kind of go with the story and say, "Oh my gosh, what's going to happen?" Right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's sort of how, yeah. So the process was a little bit different for me this time, but in general, I like to do the one chapter a week story. But if I'm able to go with it like I did for Born on Monday, I'm happy with that. No
Yeah.
complaints. Yeah.
And what risks have you taken with your writing that have paid off?
So I think really I'm going to be, I do lean thrillers, but at the same time, I'm very much a cross genre writer. And I
Yeah.
think it comes across in Born on Monday because
Hmm.
I have a thriller, it is a thriller, it's a suspense novel, but at the same time, I do have a lot of literary depth with the characters. And so that's kind of like you kind of have to find, I believe, the balance between that because, thriller readers don't necessarily want a lot of character depth.
Right.
And literary people who like literary fiction don't necessarily they're not necessarily looking for a lot of thrills. So I try to like hit that sweet spot in the middle where they're both very strong components, and then I just sort of merge them together. I would say that's probably the biggest risk. But in general, I'm a cross-genre writer, and I think in years ahead, in the next books that I write, it's going to be they're going to be all over the place, and
Yeah.
we'll see how that works out, right? Sort of like a Walter Mosley is very good at that. He writes
Mhm.
all sorts of different things, right? And he's one of my favorite authors, and I think he does it very well, and nobody tries to pigeonhole him. Where I think some authors they always feel like they're pigeonholed into whatever
Mhm.
series or whatever they're writing. So I think that's the risk.
What is the most valuable piece of advice that you've been giving about your writing?
So in terms of as the stories, or do you mean as like a writer?
As a writer.
As a writer, okay. So for a writer, what I like to tell people is that you really just need to take your work like seriously because I think there's a lot of people who start writing a book and they treat it as a hobby. But at the same time, and I think that's fine. That's a fine way to get started. But you still have to have a little bit of discipline to make sure that you're working on your story on a regular or working on it on a regular basis. And that's
Right.
kind of why I was doing the one chapter a week for a certain amount of weeks is because I actually take like I dedicate, let's say, Monday to working on fiction because I do have a day job, and then the rest of the week I do my day job, but I just like kind of finish out that chapter. and then I start the next chapter the following week. But that's because I'm taking it seriously. So you always want to take your work like not like seriously, like oh, but seriously in that if you're not taking your work seriously as a writer, then it's going to be really hard for readers to take your work seriously as well. And I think that's kind of the payoff, right? So you have to treat it like work so that they say, wow, you put some work into it. It's not like you're just, oh, I'm just having a good old time with my little hobby. And that's
Right.
sort of like what I learned along the way. So,
And who do you trust to give you constructive criticism on your writing?
I do have an in-house editor, so she's very good. And so she gives me a lot of constructive advice. Like it's my wife, but also she was a coworker. So
Mhm.
years ago, she worked for my company for like, which is a communication writing company, and she worked for with me for like 10 years. So I trust her a lot, and she reads a lot of books. So when she reads my books, she can kind of tell me like, wow, this is really a good book, or this is really a good book. And she likes that they're very different. Like Third Wheel, she liked for a different reason than she liked Born on Monday and 50
Mhm.
States as well, because there's I have a style that comes through, but at the same time they're very different books.
Right.
Yeah. And so I think that's kind of so I do trust her input. Then the other thing I like to do, I do get an outside editor. So I
Mhm.
kind of trust their input. I like to have a professional look at it to catch some of the things like maybe like I miss or that even my in-house editor misses because she's used to my writing.
Mhm.
And then I also I usually handpick about 5 beta readers just to get a feel for the book, and they usually represent different demographics. I like to have like one author if I can. I like to have like maybe one guy. I like to have somebody who's a little bit younger, somebody who's a little bit older, and that's how I kind of pick who my beta readers are, and then they give me feedback on it. This one actually had very little feedback on it. Everybody just seemed to love the story, so I was very excited about that. With Third Wheel, I had some significant changes I made because of the input from one of the beta readers who was an author in the United Kingdom, and so she had like a few things that she kind of called out, and it did influence my writing in that way. So I'm very open to constructive criticism. Once it's published, you don't really look for it,
Right.
but ahead of time, I'm very open to the people that I kind of trust to do work that process forward. Yeah.
And are there any books or authors that inspired you to become an author?
So yeah, the authors I like to point at, I love Ernest Hemingway, and I like John Updike. And then
Hmm.
there's another writer I have, and there's other writers too. I could mention some of my newer favorites, like S.A. Cosby is like I think he's doing some really great, brilliant stuff with this whole Southern Gothic crime fiction.
Yeah.
He's a little bit influential, but I also like Russell Banks. Now, Russell Banks is kind of an interesting guy. Like I mentioned, like two classics that most people have heard the name, but a lot of people haven't heard of Russell Banks. So he was like, if you said these are classics, and then you
Mhm.
had like this subgroup of authors, he fits in that subgroup. So he was in a sense writing classics, but people haven't really heard about him. But he was just a phenomenal writer. And I also like James Salter for a very similar reason. And I already mentioned Walter Mosley, who I actually took a class from him online.
Oh,
It was like,
that's
yeah.
awesome.
And so I learned a lot from like his take on writing as well. I think what all these writers have in common, at least for me, is that they really dive deep into the human experience and they want to be truthful to the human experience on how it is. Like whether we're flawed or not flawed, or that doesn't really matter as long as you're just being writing like real, true human prose, and just cutting to the truth of the matter of how people feel. And I think that's how the stories develop, and that's what makes them so believable. Yeah.
Yeah. And what came first for you when you wrote Born on Monday? Was it the plot or the characters?
Um, I think, well, I had the characters established because of Time Capsule, so they kind of merged together. But the plot, um, and I knew where I wanted it to end. I had nothing. I didn't know what was going to happen in the middle, but that was where the plot really developed. Once I knew it was a stalker plot, that kind of really gave me some clarity in terms of how I wanted to progress. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean. So I kind of like, I'm a writer who kind of balances the plotting and the pantsing, as they call it, like just kind of going by the seat of your pants. And with Born on Monday, I think one of the biggest changes that occurred was I don't know how you felt about Andrea Kearney, the journalist, but
Hmm.
she was just a supporting character on the front end. I had no idea that she had become a major player in this story, and I think she lent a lot to it. A lot of people told me that because she's a strong woman character that they really like that.
Yeah, I really loved that in her. Yeah.
And so that's kind of where you kind of get surprised along the way. So in this case, it was sort of emerging between the two things. It's the plot. Now, I do think in general, if I was like, let's say, giving a class, I'd probably say that we should probably think of the plot first because I believe characters are a slave to the plot and not the
Mhm.
other way around. Like some people develop these like very elaborate character sketches, and then they're sort of trapped in terms of what they can do and how they're going to interact with the plot. And I think we
Right.
have to be careful with that. That's just my take.
Yeah. And do you prefer self-publishing or going through a publishing company?
So I'm kind of like in a hybrid because my company is a marketing advertising firm that had publishing experience. So I kind of have used that as my bridge point. So it's like the best of small both worlds in the sense that it acts like a small press, but at the same time I'm an indie author. So I kind of get the best of both worlds. I'm not against going traditional. In fact, what I probably do is, especially with Born on Monday, excuse me, as I'm thinking about what I'm thinking about with Born on Monday is to send it out to some literary agents who might look at foreign rights and film rights and kind of go from there. And that would sort of help me bridge that gap where I could do traditional and self-publishing at the same time. I would probably pursue traditional if I would, had more patience, but
Yeah.
I just don't. Like once I'm done with the book and I know it's solid and I'm sending it off to editors and things like that. I'm not looking to get wrapped up and have it come out 2 years later. I'm looking to have it come out within 6 months after that process is complete.
Yeah. And does anyone in your family read your books?
Oh, well, definitely my wife. Yeah. My kids, they poke around with my books. I'm not going to
Yeah.
say they read them straight out. They do like them. In fact, ironically, my daughter didn't read Born on Monday. She hasn't read that yet, but one of her friends was a beta reader because I wanted somebody who was in college and
Hmm.
ferocious reader, and they had already been introduced to Third Wheel and they loved it. So I was like, all right, if you loved the Third Wheel, well, let's see what you think about Born on Monday because they like thrillers and she was very excited to have that opportunity, you know.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
awesome.
So I'd like my kids to read it, but everybody has their own taste in what they're, kind of reading.
Okay. And out of all the books you've written, which one would you say is your favorite?
That one I can't really say, Brooke. I mean, you're really pinning me down. I just like them. They're like them for very different reasons. I like 50
Right.
States because it was my first, and I love that it's an eclectic genre bending. You don't know from story to story if it's going to be a thriller or if it's a slice of life or if it's paranormal. You just don't know, and I love that element of it, right? And then
Right.
Third Wheel, there is so much of my experiences that match the main characters, the protagonists, that I have a little bit of an attachment for that particular reason. I mean, I'm not the same person as Brady Wilkes, but I do have that attachment to that character because of the same experiences, even though we're different people. And then Born on Monday is just the way it came together. It just is a story, and the way that some of the characters evolved. I just ended up kind of falling in love with that story, so much so that um, I wouldn't be surprised. Not my next project, but I wouldn't be surprised if I kind of I'm going to think really hard about bringing that a little bit to life. Maybe have not necessarily a sequel, but something that's related to Born on Monday come up later on. Mainly because I think I want Andrea to come back into a story,
Yeah, that would
and,
be good. Yeah.
and then there's like a little bit of an Easter egg in Born on Monday to some degree. So anybody who's read 50 States will notice that in New Hampshire, I talk about this bar named Krabby's. And if
Hmm.
you read the New Hampshire story in 50 States, within a year of Born on Monday happening, that bar, Krabby's, actually gets burned down. And that's what the story is about in 50 States. So that character's name is Raleigh, and I'd really love to write Raleigh's story because that's definitely a straight up hardcore crime fiction.
Hmm.
And I think that would be just a blast to write. And then since it all happens in New England and it deals with like the New England mob, that would be an excellent opportunity to bring Andrea Kearney back in as an investigative journalist that he runs into. I think. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
Um, how do you process and deal with negative book reviews?
So I just look at it as sort of like, well, it's kind of an interesting thing. So a lot of authors like really worry about negative book reviews, and I have like a
Mhm.
completely different take on it. And not that I'm asking for negative reviews by any stretch, but so I don't mind them. So 50 States had some that were like, there were a couple people who just didn't like it, because I do write a little bit, my work leans a little bit dark. And I
Mhm.
think that's off-putting for some people. And there are a couple people that really downrated me for that reason. And I just look at it as, hey, that's just their taste difference. Like if you look
Yeah.
at any classic online, like if, I don't know, Of Mice and Men or Catcher in the Rye or The Outsiders or any book like that, you're going to see that there's some people give it 1 star and some people give it 5 stars. So it's
Mm.
really so much about our personal preference. The irony is now Third Wheel only got 4 and 5 star reviews. So it actually kind of, which is this is the crazy part. It actually hurts sales because people will see that you have like 40 plus 4 and 5 star reviews, but there's no 3 and 2 and 1. So they don't believe it. So now they're not believing that,
Right.
that how could it be that good? But that's what third wheel was, that in a sense that good, for most readers. Yeah. And for most judges, because it did win a few literary awards along the way.
And what advice would you give to someone who's trying to write their first book, but they're afraid to put their work out there?
If there's, I don't, yeah. So I think you just need to write, and you need to write and work on what you think your story is, and just kind of go from there. I don't like the idea of authors worrying about too much of the audience or the audience reception. I know there are some authors that like to write to the market. I don't
Hmm.
think that's where we got the best books from. I think we get the best books from authors who are just creating and kind of creating something new, right? And something really exciting. So I think just taking advice from some of my own experiences, I think that just settling down and finding that time to write and just dedicating yourself to making sure that you have a certain set amount of time to write, start sooner than later, and then sticking to it every week. Maybe you write a chapter in a month, or maybe it's every 2 weeks, not as aggressive as I try to do. Certainly not 23 in a month. I promise you that just was one of those crazy things.
Yeah.
But it's just kind of like sit down and like just do it and get the job done. And I think by pacing yourself along the way, you start to see the results. And then don't be afraid to share it with people, because especially if you have people who are close to you who are interested in your work, and you can share it with them, and they'll give you the feedback to say, hey, you're a little bit off here, or maybe this is a little bit wrong. Just like even with Third Wheel, I had the one beta reader. She came back and she said, well, actually, this is one of the interesting things about that, is she had said that one of the punishments that the mom gave to Brady Wilkes was not believable. She didn't believe it, and so I actually toned it down, even though that particular punishment was one that occurred to me in real life. So
Oh.
but she had a good point where I had to do that, and then there was another point in there where I think somebody gets flipped out of a truck,
Hmm.
and and what I didn't make it clear on was that Brady Wilkes sort of exaggerated his retelling of it. So because Brady Wilkes wasn't a trustworthy narrator all the time.
Hmm.
Sometimes he exaggerated things, or it's just his point of view because it was a first person book. And so I just made sure that was a little bit more clear, and she ended up, really liking that aspect of it.
Yeah. And what's next for you as an author?
So I have, yeah, I'm actually 3 chapters in on my next work in progress. And so that one's pretty exciting. That one's going to take place in Utah. It's a little bit of an eco thriller with a little bit metaphysics and science fiction thrown in. So I haven't necessarily clarified it, but the best thing for anybody to do who's really interested is if you read the Utah story in 50 states, you'll know exactly what I'm going to be doing. That one's going to be just it's just going to be a thrill ride, start to end. It's just going to be one giant thrill, a little bit of claustrophobia at times, but it really just start to finish, just complete action, thriller, suspense all the way through. Yeah.
That sounds amazing.
So
I
that
can't
one's
wait to read that one.
okay. Is that kind of in your vein of what
Yeah.
you like? Yeah. So, and that one starts off, I don't mind saying, like in 50 states, because that's the front part of the story. The story itself was about two 20-something-year-olds that they decide that they're driving back to Arizona through Utah after seeing her brother, the driver's brother, and they decide to just get off the road for a minute, just sort of refresh. And they end up taking a road that has a lot of warning signs on it. And at first, they're kind of like just cryptic warning signs, like just, go back, or they're just like tires, or kind of rough like that. But as they go deeper, they start to see that the signs start to be kind of new. and they end up running into a government biohazard. And that's kind of where the story takes off and what happens to them. And then kind of along the way. So it's really kind of like what's happening in the deserts of the United States in some cases. And then I have a complete story that kind of fits that particular genre.
That sounds so amazing. Well, thank you so much for talking with me again.
Oh, thank you, Brooke. It was great to see you again.
It was
I'm so
great to
glad
see
it's like
you
our
too.
second book together. So
Yeah, it
that's
was. Yeah. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll send you a copy of our interview like I did last time.
absolutely. I look forward to it. Okay.
All right.
Take
Have a
care.
great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.